Abhinavji, I want to begin by asking you about probably the most burning policy question in front of the country right now, and that is the farm reform bills. And there is so much we could discuss there, including both the politics and economics of it. But I want to begin by asking you about the origin of things like the APMCs, the Essential Commodities Act, etc. How did all of these different frameworks and structures come into being? And why do we need to reform them?
Yeah, but that's a very interesting question, Kamal. See, if you want to understand what is happening, we have to first understand that what has been the food policy of India. So, after independence, the objectives of Indian food policy was basically to ensure, first of all, the food security. Because remember, after 200 years of the British rule, India's food security was completely destroyed. One way to look at the British rule or the colonial rule is that there were 200 years of famine and hunger and mass starvation. So our first priority was to build food security so that we have enough food grains available in India that we do not have famines. Second was to ensure that the farmers get enough income from their farming activities because that was the core of the India's economy at that time, and we really wanted our farmers to have high income because so they can drive up the Indian economic growth rate. And the third was that people or the masses get access to the food grains at a cheaper rate. Now, these three objectives are very good in themselves, but there's a problem. The problem is that we cannot achieve all three of them simultaneously. Think of it in this way. If we are increasing the higher food grains production, if the supply is increasing in the economy, the prices is definitely going to fall. When the prices of the food grains is falling, then the incomes of the farmers will get affected. They will also decline. And if in order to ensure that the farmers' income remain higher, we artificially increase the prices, the consumers will get hurt via higher inflation. Now, and this is the problem we have been trying to solve, and we have never been able to solve because all these three objectives are contradictory to each other in the sense that they're not negatively contradictory, but they're impossible to achieve simultaneously. So, what we did in the 1960s, basically, when we had two wars, we had two major famines in India, it became very clear that we have to do something about the food security in India because the 5-year plans had failed. It was clear by that time that they are not working, and we have made an error by going the way of this Nehru and Mahalanobis heavy industrialization policy. So, under Lal Bahadur Shastri, a program was initiated, which is now known as the Green Revolution. And the pillar of the Green Revolution was very simple that we're going to focus on certain areas, that is Punjab and Haryana, because they're closer to Delhi. And also, historically, in the last century, they had built extensive networks of irrigation canal. So they were quite fertile. And the agriculture was well developed as compared to the eastern part of India. So we focused there. We told them, that we are going to give you easy access to credit. We are going to give you easy access to water, electricity, and not only that, we are going to guarantee you that the state is going to buy whatever you produce at a minimum price. So that a minimum support price, not the minimum price, because that's a floor price. So we told them that you focus on wheat and rice. This is what we need for the public distribution system. So you grow wheat and rice. We are going to ensure that all of that is bought at a good enough price, which is now known as minimum support price, and that will be procured by the state under the Sarkari Mandis, which is what you call APMCs today. So this was the entire system. The root or the origin of APMC basically goes back to the 19th century under the British rule, when they wanted to extract resources from Indian agriculture for the British industry. So they set up these uh, government or the Sarkari marketing committees in the central India, in the region of Berar, and the cotton farmers were forced to sell all their cottons into these mandis to the government appointed agents. So that is the origin. But of course, the APMC system we have today is different from what it was then. But that is the origin. That this is what lies. You want to channelize the resources from the agriculture for a specific purpose. Under PDS, APMC, we are also doing the same. We're channelizing the wheat and rice into PDS system through the APMC. The origin of price control is much more sinister. So we all know Alauddin Khilji. And Alauddin Khilji basically instituted the policy of price control over the food grains because he wanted to make sure that the Turkish settlers in India, so by that time, Turkish invasion had happened in India, and you had these garrison towns being established throughout the northern India because the Delhi Sultanate or the Sultanate period was simply the military occupation of the northern India. So he wanted to make sure that the urban population, because Hindus, most of the Hindus were displaced, old towns were destroyed, new garrison towns were being established, and they get access to cheap grain because the nature of the Delhi Sultanate was it was a Turkish state, right? That it was a racist state. So they wanted to make sure that the food grain and the other daily commodities are available to the urban population and the army at a cheap price. So he instituted this very brutal price control, which basically destroyed the peasantry, which was mostly Hindu. And that there was also a political motive that you destroy the native population so that they cannot rebel and they cannot pose resistance to you. And since then, this kind of price control in one form or the other has continued. So Alauddin Khilji was an extreme case, right? But this price control did continue, this idea did continue. And but the root of the modern price control, which is what you call the Essential Commodities Act, goes to the World War. So in the World War II, basically there was a shortage of food grain and also of the other essential commodities. So British government came up with this law that we have to regulate the prices of these commodities, and so that the evil Hindu businessman do not hoard the food grains or so. So and even after independence, we continued with that because remember after independence also our condition was really bad in the terms of food security. There's huge scarcity. India has come out of a bloody partition. We had lost a major portion of our fertile agricultural land to Pakistan, which is the western Punjab. So we did not want to take any chances, so we had that price control. But the problem is that both the APMC and the Essential Commodities Act, they have their origin in something negative. And something which has its origin in negative cannot work or cannot give you positive result, even though you repackage it and restructure it. So this is what we have been doing since the 1960s. And the result was, in short term, it was good because the food grains production actually boomed because farmers were incentivized and they were producing wheat and grain. But in the long term, what has happened is very devastating. Number one, MSP is artificially high price. So you are basically distorting the market prices. And remember, the prices in the economy are signals. This signal resource allocation. So if you distort the prices, you are distorting the resource allocation, which will have second order effect, third order effect on the economy, which might be very negative. And this is what has happened in Punjab and Haryana, that the cropping pattern has completely changed. The biodiversity of Punjab has been destroyed because everyone is growing wheat and rice because there is an artificially high MSP on that. And Punjab and this part of the India is basically water scarce region. People don't realize it. It's an arid region, and it's not meant for rice cultivation. But the Punjab farmers are growing basmati rice as well, which is very water intensive crop. So what is happening in Punjab that the water tables have been destroyed, fertility is declining. In fact, the condition is so bad that within next 20, 30 years, Punjab might be facing widespread drought. It might be a very disastrous situation for the entire northwestern India. And the fertility is declining. But in order to keep on increasing the production, because you have a perverse incentive in the form of the MSP, the Punjabi farmers are using lots of chemical fertilizers, pesticides, and so on, to the extent that Punjab today is the cancer belt of India. Right, the highest per capita cases of cancer are in Punjab. So this second order effect, third order effect of MSP is quite devastating. So we really need to move away from the MSP as such. APMCs, what have the APMCs done? So when they were brought in, I mean, they were brought in to ensure that there's a more systematic procurement of the food grains from the Punjab and the Haryana farmers to feed the PDS system, public distribution system, so that we can distribute cheap food grains to our poorer population in the rest of the country. But the over the time, the rich farmers, because green revolution basically changed the farming community itself. You have the rise of the capitalist farmers. Capitalist farmers are the one who owns the means of production. who are employing wage labor as opposed to the traditional labor, and who are basically working for the profit motive. Some of these farmers became very rich, right? And given the social dynamics on the ground, they came to dominate these APMCs. So APMCs became state-sponsored monopoly of certain private capitalist farmers. And what we don't understand is that there's a big they are also the politicians on the countryside, they're also the businessmen, and they're also the large farmers. And there's something else which people don't understand, the interlinkages in the agrarian relations. So what will happen that these big farmers are also jamindars, they're also traders, and they're also money lenders. So they will advance loans to the other farmers, other small farmers, or the tenants on their land. And the interest rate charged will be very high. And in return, those farmers will have to come to the APMC, sell the food crops to these farmers alone. They have no freedom. So this was kind of a same system of ushery coming back in the system, ironically sponsored by the state sponsored monopoly. So now when the government is trying to move away from it, in the sense they're not abolishing APMCs or the MSP, they're simply saying, well, we allow the farmers to go anywhere, and we also allow the private sector to come and buy from them directly. No need to come to the APMC. If they want to buy it from their farms itself, good enough. And these vested interests who have been benefiting from this system so far, and who also control the unions because they control the local politics, so they are up in arms against this thing. And that is why you see they're not willing to debate the farm laws. They're not going to go clause by clause. They're not interested even in the Supreme Court appointed committee. They just want a repeal of the law because it has nothing to do with the provisions of the laws themselves, which are in fact very good. It has to do with the wider political economy, as they feel threatened that their social and economic and political position might decline in the coming years.
Thank you so much, Abhinavji. I think that was a very comprehensive account, both how these things evolved and also where we stand today.
Namaste. We hope you enjoyed this Chitti Media content. Please remember to subscribe to us and switch on the notifications for this channel. For our other social media links, more content, and to support our work, please visit citti.net. Dhanyavad. Namaskar.